Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about 4 critical coil pottery techniques. I've taught a lot of coil potters, and these are things that I've seen a lot of students struggle with. The 4 subjects we're going to discuss are bonding coils, pinching consistently thin walls, refining the shape, and smoothing the rim. So even though you might not struggle with all 4 of these, or perhaps you do, I bet you struggle with at least one of them. And there's probably something you can pick up here and use to improve your coil pottery. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to show you is bonding coils. This is something that I struggled a great deal with when I first, actually for years after I got started, not even when I first started. And that is, if this coil doesn't get bonded well to the previous coil or the base, then that's a potential crack spot later as it dries. And so you have to make sure that that coil becomes part of the pot and is not just sitting there loosely. Sometimes you can smooth over the top where that seam is, but underneath there's still a seam, and then when the pot dries or in the firing, it can crack right along that seam. So we want to try to, our goal should be to make that coil as much a part of the pot as you can. And that really comes down to a bonding pinch, which is one of the pinches I teach to my students. I've talked about it in a previous video. I'll put the link to that video up here in case you're interested. The key to properly bonding your coil to the pot wall is you want to take this coil and you want to smush it firmly into that bottom portion, the base. And you want to do that over and over again down the side of the pot. You don't want to leave any spot where you haven't bonded it correctly. Now I'm using my thumb on the inside to back that up so that I'm not pushing it out of shape. Can you see inside there where I've done it? And then I'm using my forefinger on the outside to press it down. Sometimes I can do it the other way and do the actual pinch with my thumb, but you want to make sure you get that firmly bonded all the way around the pot so that it doesn't crack there. This is a potential fail point for your pottery, which is why you'll see some coil potters using really fat coils and only a couple of them. And that just eliminates some of these potential fail points where the coil is bonded. Now I've been asked about slipping and scoring. So a lot of the tutorials on coiling you'll see, they score the clay and then they put down a little layer of slip before they attach the coil. I suppose that eliminates this issue with making sure it's bonded correctly, but it also is an additional step that's going to make your coiling take longer. It requires more equipment, it requires more time. And traditionally in the Southwest, that is not seen unless you're attaching handles or lugs or something that's going to be a little more complicated to keep attached, especially during the drying process. So as long as you figure out how to bond correctly, you shouldn't need to score and slip. Unless the pot has been setting for a while and kind of dried out, then it is helpful. And that's all there is to it. You just want to make sure you've got that coil correctly and firmly bonded into the base before you continue with pinching and smoothing your pot. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is pinching a consistently thin pot. And I've seen so many students struggle with this. I often tell my students that the goal that we're shooting for is about 1/4 inch in thickness. And that's going to vary wildly based on your clay, based on your abilities. Even more advanced students sometimes struggle with, like, they're looking at a 1/4 inch, they want that, but their pots always come out much, much thicker or much, much thinner. It depends on the student. Some of them will over pinch the clay and come out with pots that are so thin, they're wobbly, they're kind of tipping over. So getting the right consistency and the right thinness is very important to advancing as a potter and also towards building structures that you can continue to build up. So I've got this coil attached and I need to pinch it thinner because it's too thick. So I'm just coming around and I'm gently pinching. And while I'm doing that, I'm compressing a little. And this goes back to those main pinches that I talked about. And I'll put a link above to that video where I talk about the different pinches. But I'm compressing a little. I'm pulling it together because if I just pinch, the pot continues to come out, and I'm trying to bring it in. So I'm pinching and compressing. But the main thing I want to talk about is that as I'm pinching, I'm kind of getting a feel for how thick the clay is, okay? Just as if you pinch something solid, like this trowel. I can pinch, I'd close my eyes and pinch this and have some idea how thick it is. Or my scraper. If I close my eyes and pinch it, I can get a feel for how thick it is. And it's the same way with the clay. I'm kind of feeling how thick it is. And there's places where it's too thick. Down here, where the coil came together, I can feel that it's thicker. And so I'm pinching there more aggressively. Up here, up slightly above that, it's not as thick. And so I'm pinching there much lighter. And so as I'm working around the pot, I'm trying to get a feel for the clay and know where it needs to come in. And this is something that I think you develop with time, a better feel for the clay. But this is something that is a very, very important technique to master if you're going to be doing much coil pottery making. That is having a feel for how thick the wall is. And it's something that can be developed if you don't have it initially. Keep working at it. Keep thinking about how thick it is as you pinch. Do not pinch too thin. This is the other thing I emphasize to my students. It's better to have it too thick than too thin. If you think you might be pinching too thin, I'd err on the side of too thick. Too thick, you still have that strength. You pinch too thin, you lose your strength, and then your pot wall starts to collapse or fall over or slump, or you have trouble attaching another coil because it's so wobbly, it won't stand up with another coil on top of it. Of course, a lot of this depends on the quality of your clay. Some clays have more wet strength and can stand up being thinner. Other clays have less wet strength and cannot tolerate being thin. And I don't add another coil until I find that I've got it a good consistent thickness through most of that. Now there's some smoothing that's going to take place later with the scraper, but the thickness is what I'm thinking of, not the smoothness. So there might be lumps, there might be divots, there might be indentations where the coil was attached. That I'll deal with the scraper. But the thickness, the consistently thin wall, is what I'm thinking of here. And that is what I'm feeling for as I work my way all the way around. And I reach down all the way to where that coil was attached. Now, the coil was attached here, so this is the distance that I got out of that coil after I pinched it up. I got a good 2 inches, maybe a little more, of wall height out of that one coil by pinching it up. And I have to make sure that I don't get so big a coil that I can't reach with my thumb and forefinger down to where they attached. That way I can get it pinched all the way up before I add another coil. Because once I've added another coil, I won't be able to reach with my thumb and forefinger down all the way to where that came together. So it's important to get this done before you add another coil, or you might extend beyond your reach. Okay, and that's pretty good. That's how I pinch consistently thin walls on my pottery. The thing to remember about pottery is there are no right and wrong answers. One thing may work well for me and may not work well for you at all. So experiment, find out what works for you, and do it that way. A lot of teachers will try to tell you this is the way it needs to be done. And with clay, there's no correct answer. It's what works for you. And these methods that I'm teaching you here are methods that work for me, or I've seen work for my students in the past. Okay, the next step I want to talk about is refining the shape. That is making sure your shape is round, it's even all the way around. If you have a shoulder, that shoulder is consistent all the way around. This is another thing that students often struggle with, even advanced students. Their shapes are a little lopsided or wonky in some way. So this is something that you can put off until a later stage. If you want, you can have a number of coils built onto your pot, but you need to do it while the clay is still plastic and while you can still reach inside. So before you constrict that neck too much, you need to get this done. Now what I do usually is have a wet scraper, the gourd scraper that I use. And I sell these on my website if you can't find one. I also have a video on how to make gourd scrapers. So I'll put a link up here to how to make gourd scrapers, and then there'll be a link in the doobly-doo if you want to purchase a gourd scraper from my website. So I just make sure the scraper's wet. That way it'll flow along the surface of the pot without, you know, making a dent, grabbing the clay, anything like that. And I'm using my left hand, in this case, on the outside as a bit of an anvil to keep from pushing it out. And I'm using the scraper on the inside to press the form out. And everything that I do, I'm going to try to go all the way around 360 degrees before I stop. That way I'm getting the same amount of roundness. And I'm feeling with my hand as I go and try to make it consistent. And you're going to have to look at it. You may look at it, get down and look at it from the side and decide, you know, if there's a place where it's pushing in too far, then you can take your damp scraper and you can press that area in from the outside a little bit. Or look at the way your neck's coming up. You want it to come up at a particular consistent angle, and maybe over here it's bulging out a little bit. So I'm going to get on here with my scraper and I might press it in an area where it's coming out too far. And areas that need to come out from the inside, of course, are pushed this way. And you can just work your way all the way around the pot this way, making sure that your form is consistent, making sure that your shape is even. And it requires a little bit of finesse, a little bit of getting a feel for your clay and its working properties. So once again, like all of these things, practice is going to make you better. But you do want to take the time at about this stage and look at your form. Is it rounded? Is it consistently round this way? Is the profile good this way? And turn it. And if there's a spot where it's out of round, where it's inconsistent in its form, then now is the time to work on it. My clay is still plastic, and I can still reach inside. Once I've closed the mouth up, all I can work on is pushing in places. I can't push out once that mouth is closed. In some cases, I might be able to get a stick or a spoon or something down inside there and press it out. But for the most part, you're not doing much refining the form once that mouth is closed up a little bit. Gently scraping the outside, pressing that in places where it needs it. Once again, using my hand on the inside and feeling that I'm not pushing too far, keeping myself from overdoing it. So that's how refining the shape works. Once you're done, it should be fairly consistent all the way around, this way and this way. So the last point I'm going to cover is smoothing the rim, which is something, again, that a lot of people struggle. I certainly struggled with for a long time. I'm still not an expert. I know some people that do some amazing rims, and I'm not one of them. But I think I have some things to teach you. So in getting a smooth rim, the first thing you want to do is look at the rim for consistency. Look at it from the side, this way, and make sure that there's no places that stand up too high, or if there's a place that's too low, you can get a little clay and stuff it in there. Then you want to look at the rim this way, and you want to see any areas where the clay is thicker or thinner, so that it's rather consistent thickness around too. And then either trim off or fill in as needed. Once you've got the rim all trimmed and fairly consistent, even though it's not smooth, you're ready to go to the smoothing step, which is just involves getting your fingers wet, dipping your fingers in that water frequently, and then getting this rim wet and kind of sloppy. And once that clay kind of gets soft and pliable, then you can just easily use your fingers to form the rim you want. If there's an especially low point in your rim, you can pinch the clay up into that place from below. So it's a matter of taking the high points and kind of pressing them down, taking those low points, and you can take a little ball of clay and add it to it, but a lot of times you've got enough clay just below it and you can just kind of gently pinch it up into those areas. The other thing you're going to want to do is look down the mouth of your pot, see how round it is. If it's a little out of round, you can kind of pull it in places, and that should do it. Do you remember the 4 things we talked about? First, bonding your coils. Make sure you press that coil down into there good so that you have a good bond. Otherwise, you may have horizontal cracks in your pot later as it dries or after firing. I know this was a problem I struggled with for years as a coil potter. The second was pinching your walls to a consistent thickness. This is another mark of quality. As somebody looks at your pot or runs their hands inside your pot, you want them to feel that consistent quality. Or when your pot gets broken, you want to see those sherds that have a consistent thickness all the way through. You want to make sure you get a feel for the clay and pinch and feel where you're at so that you know to pinch down those thick places or to leave the thinner places. The third item we talked about was refining the shape of your pot. And that involves looking at it from the side, looking at it from above, and then using your gorge scraper to either press down those areas that need to go in and reach inside and press out those areas that need to press out, and just keep working until you get that nice, round, consistent shape that you want. And the last area we discussed was smoothing the rim. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where people are really going to notice the quality of your pottery, and that is getting a nice smooth rim. So you want to trim it down or build it up so that it's fairly consistent, and then get your fingers wet and just work that rim until it's fairly smooth and even and consistent. Remember that even little small bumps or divots in your pottery are going to become more pronounced as your pot dries. And that goes for the whole pot. Any inconsistencies in the form or in the rim or in the thickness may become more pronounced as that clay dries and shrinks. So this is your chance when it's still plastic to get it just where you want it. Don't give up until you get what you want, and keep practicing on it. These aren't things you're going to get overnight. You're not going to watch this video and tomorrow be a much better potter. These are just items you need to work on and practice when you build pottery. So hopefully these videos can help you along, help you make faster progress. Now, if you're interested in learning more about coil pottery and you want a more in-depth lesson, I have an online masterclass, Coil Pottery 101, which is very helpful and goes very in-depth on forming coil pottery. If you're interested in that, I'll put the link down in the doobly-doo. If you want some more quick tips on coil pottery to help you get better or give you some ideas on what to work on, I'm going to put that video right over here. So check that out if you want some more quick ideas on coil pottery. If you like my channel, subscribe so you know when the next video comes out. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video so I can make more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.